For 364 days a year, Americans go about their daily lives. They pay their bills, work the normal 9 to 5, and worry about having enough money for retirement. But one day a year, this day, we stop to remember the extraordinary circumstances that brought us to where we are. 11 years ago today, on a day very much like this one, 3,000 men, women, and children lost their lives. In the years that followed, thousands more died in wars, and even more were scarred both on and off the battlefield. Since that fateful day, Americans have watched as the U.S. military plunged into wars, the economy tumbled, and their rights to privacy were stripped away. For each of us, 9/11 represents something very different, very personal. But today, we want to take a look at the bigger picture. We want to know if the actions taken since then were too much or just enough, as we look at the toll the past 11 years has taken on the U.S. To help me do that, RT correspondent Anastasia Churkina is in our studio in New York with more. Hi there, Anastasia. So we've made many sacrifices in the years following 9/11, from ramped up TSA to the Patriot Act. Was this ramp up enough, and was it justified?
Megan, of course, we have to be fair here and say that certain measures were, of course, necessary, but there have been many measures put in place throughout the last 11 years that many people will, of course, agree that have been a little more than excessive. I mean, when we're seeing mothers at airports that have to throw out their baby bottles because of worries that there might be explosives in there, mothers having to taste their own breast milk at airports because there are worries that this might be dangerous for the other people taking the airplane, people removing their prosthetic limbs at airports to prove that to go through security. These are, of course, measures that I'm sure many people would say are, of course, a tad, to say the least, excessive. And this is something that Americans have been dealing with on a day-to-day basis ever since 9/11.
And Anastasia, I just want to put some numbers on the toll that 9/11 has taken on all of us. I want you to take a look at this along with our viewers. As far as the human toll goes, nearly 3,000 people were killed in the September 11th attacks. Around 4,477 were killed in Iraq. Over 2,000 were left dead in Afghanistan. And then back here in the U.S., 167 suicides were marked in 2011, while there's 116 suicides in the first part of 2012. So it goes beyond the initial 9/11 numbers. Now, as far as the financial toll goes, before 9/11, we had $128 billion surplus. Today, we have a $16 trillion debt. The New York City reconstruction efforts and policy decisions alone cost $3.3 trillion. And we've seen a 234% increase in oil prices since 2001. And as you just kind of spoke about a little bit there, the TSA also has an annual budget of $8 billion. So, I mean, obviously these numbers are not nearly extensive enough, but they do begin to paint a picture of where we are now versus then. Can you talk a little bit about how far we've come as a nation since 2001?
Absolutely, Megan. Here, you paint a wonderful picture of really, it seems like 9/11 became the day one for the rest of the future of the United States, because what we're seeing, these deaths that, of course, might have been avoided, these excessive spendings that, of course, might have been also cut down tremendously, especially in a very complicated economic situation. Really, a lot of experts and common Americans believe that it's been a way downhill, and September 11th became this sort of terrible, tragic day that led to consequences that a lot of which were quite chaotic and could have been avoided and could have been handled differently. And of course, this is something that's a very huge reality today. And as the United States, of course, goes through this turbulent time of economic attempts of economic recovery, it cannot be ignored that these enormous amounts of money, billions of dollars that were spent on security, billions of dollars that were spent in wars abroad could have probably been put to better use here at home. And we don't know how much, if people would actually feel safer today.
And Anastasia, there's been a lot of reports coming out in the news today, especially and last night. The New York Times was one of them. They published an op-ed last night called "The Deafness Before the Storm," and in it, contributor Kurt Eichenwald talked about the numerous warning signs the Bush administration had received that pointed to a possible terrorist attack. And it didn't only talk about the one on August the 6th of that year, but many others. And I want to read you part of the New York Times article. It said, while those documents are still not public, I have received excerpts from many of them, along with the others recently declassified records, and come to the inescapable conclusion. The administration's reaction to what Mr. Bush was told in the weeks before that infamous briefing reflected significantly more negligence than has been disclosed. In other words, the August 6th document, for all the controversy it provoked, is not nearly as shocking as the briefs that came before it. So, Anastasia, in his article, he cited several examples of blatant oversight. Many came down very hard on George Bush for ignoring these signs, but it can be argued, as it was in my newsroom this morning, that it wasn't simply the Bush administration's fault, but numerous agencies' fault. Is the Bush administration most at fault here, or are there other people to blame?
Well, Megan, it's of course, it's been 11 years, so whether or not a blaming game is really in place now is a question. But it's, I think here the bottom line is this. Whether George Bush, his administration, any of the agencies, some of the agencies involved had even a hint of even 1% of what we saw on September 11th, certainly more should have been done and more could have been done. So if that was in fact the case, that there could have, these signs could have been taken more seriously, then of course everybody who had any knowledge of what was to come is to blame.
Anastasia, there's been a lot of reports coming out also about the money that the first responders are now receiving or are supposed to be receiving within the next year. We're going to have to talk about that segment later or refer viewers to our online database for that discussion. RT correspondent Anastasia Churkina in New York, thank you so much for joining us.